so much going on in Ukraine right now, and I feel like every day there's a new headline about diplomatic efforts out of Europe.
Yeah, it's tough to keep up with.
It really is. And, we're hearing a lot about the EU's foreign policy chief and, what they're trying to do to shape Europe's future security, especially, with everything going on.
Absolutely.
And I think for this deep dive, it would be really valuable to kind of get a clear picture of what's actually happening.
Definitely.
What are the different perspectives? What are the main challenges that are out there? And, really ground all of this in, the most recent reporting we have.
Sounds good. Yeah, because when you look at this whole situation, it's amazing how everything's connected. You've got what's happening inside the EU itself, then you've got Russia's, ongoing pressure, and then this huge question mark hanging over, the U.S. and how involved they'll be going forward.
Right.
It's like this tangled web. And if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to untangle each thread.
Makes sense.
To see how they all fit together.
So let's start with Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign policy chief.
Okay.
She came into this role with some pretty big goals, right? Especially when it comes to getting more military aid to Ukraine.
Definitely ambitious.
There was even talk of a plan, Kallas.
Right from the start, it seemed like she wanted to make a real difference. And the reporting suggests that she was pushing for a big increase in military support to Ukraine.
Wow.
This plan, Kallas, it was all about getting EU member states to commit way more resources,
Okay.
But that's where things get complicated right away.
Because not everyone was on board.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about Hungary this time.
Oh, really?
A bunch of major EU countries, they're reportedly pushing back against these calls for more money. France, Italy, Spain specifically, are being named as hesitant about upping their contributions.
Interesting. And those are some of the EU's biggest economies, right?
Exactly. And to really understand how divided things are, think about this. The combined contributions from those three big countries, it's actually less than what Denmark is giving on its own.
Wow, that's wild.
It really shows you how hard it is to get everyone on the same page.
It's a fixed challenge for sure. And, Kallas chose to launch this initiative right around the third anniversary of Russia's what they call the special operation in Ukraine.
Right.
That timing feels pretty deliberate, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think she wanted to emphasize how urgent the situation is.
Right.
By tying it to that anniversary, it becomes this, pivotal moment.
Like a turning point.
Exactly. A chance for the EU to really show that they're serious about supporting Ukraine. It also puts Kallas's authority to the test, since she's relatively new in this role.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what's interesting is that this whole idea of increasing aid wasn't even her idea originally, was it?
Oh, you're right. It was actually her predecessor, Joseph Borrell, who first suggested it.
Right. And it seems like Kallas initially kind of put it on the back burner.
Yeah, it wasn't a priority at first, but then after the Munich Security Conference, she suddenly revived it.
So what do you make of that?
Well, some diplomats are saying that maybe she should have laid more groundwork, built more support before pushing it so hard.
Because it was such a sensitive issue.
Exactly. And it seems like she's had some bumps in the road internally, too, during her first few months in office.
Yeah, we're hearing about some big staff changes happening pretty early on.
Yeah, right from the get-go, Kallas made some significant personnel moves.
Right.
Like dismissing some high-ranking officials.
And one of them was the Secretary General of the External Affairs Service, right?
Yeah, and he was from Italy and that kind of thing. It can cause some tension.
Because it's seen like a national issue?
Exactly. It can be interpreted that way. And it's not just the dismissals themselves, it's the reports about her overall management style.
What have you heard about that?
Well, the word on the street is that she's got a pretty insular management style.
Okay.
Her inner circle, they're not really tapping into the experience of the broader staff in the External Affairs Service.
So people are feeling sidelined.
Yeah, and that kind of dynamic can create friction and potentially make it harder to get things done.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about those aid targets, because it seems like Kallas had to lower her ambitions.
That's right. She had to scale back.
And what does that tell us about the situation?
I think it shows just how much resistance she's facing. At first she wanted to aim high.
Right.
She was looking at a contribution that would be even bigger than last year's based on each country's economic indicators.
Oh, wow.
And the goal was to get to about 40 billion euros to make up for any cuts in U.S. aid.
But that didn't happen.
No, the latest reports are showing a much softer approach.
How so?
Well, instead of setting specific targets, now they're just inviting member states to contribute based on the size of their economies.
Oh, I see.
So it's not mandatory anymore.
All right.
And the immediate goal, the first step, is to deliver 2 million artillery shells, which is about 5 billion euros.
Okay.
That's a lot lower than the initial figures they were talking about.
Yeah, it sounds like they had to adjust their expectations.
Definitely. It seems like Kallas is facing challenges not just within the EU, but also with the U.S.
Oh, yeah. Their relationship seems a bit strained, to say the least.
Yeah, especially with the current administration.
Right. And how is that affecting her ability to do her job effectively?
Well, some diplomats think that her very public and pretty harsh criticisms of the U.S. administration haven't helped.
Like when she called Trump's approach to the Ukraine conflict a dirty deal.
Exactly. That kind of talk can make it really tough to be involved in any future peace talks.
And then there was that canceled meeting during her visit to Washington.
Oh, yeah. That was pretty telling.
What happened there?
So she was supposed to meet with the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but it got canceled at the last minute.
Oh, wow.
The official reason was a scheduling conflict, but what's really interesting is that she didn't meet with any other administration officials during that whole trip.
That does seem like a sign that things are not good between them.
Right, it suggests a certain distance or maybe even a deliberate cooling of relations.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Washington that raised eyebrows at her comments.
Oh, you mean about needing a new leader for the free world?
Yeah, that statement after Trump and Vice President Vance criticized Zelensky, it caused quite a stir.
I think it rubs some people the wrong way.
Why is that?
Well, even though some might agree with her sentiment, the timing and the fact that she said it publicly, it was seen as potentially undermining diplomatic efforts.
Right.
And there were reports that other politicians were advising Zelensky privately to try and smooth things over with Trump.
And he actually did, right.
He reportedly has, which tells you something about how seriously everyone's taking the potential shift in U.S. policy.
Yeah, they have to be careful.
It's a delicate balancing act.
For sure. So it seems like Kallas is facing pushback from all sides.
Yeah, she's got her work cut out for her.
And now there's even talk of appointing a special envoy for Ukraine, which could make her job even more difficult.
That's a new wrinkle that's worth keeping an eye on.
How would that even work?
Well, the president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, he was reportedly checking to see how much support there was for appointing a special envoy specifically for Ukraine. And some people in Brussels saw this as a way of undermining Kallas,
Because it would be stepping on her toes.
Exactly, it's her area of responsibility.
Right.
And even though it wasn't officially discussed at the recent EU summit,
Okay.
they're apparently still looking for a suitable candidate.
So the idea hasn't gone away.
Not yet, which raises questions about, who's really in charge.
It's interesting because when Kallas was appointed, there was so much optimism.
Oh, I remember that everyone was excited to have a fresh face.
She was the first former prime minister to become the EU's foreign policy chief, right?
Yeah, at 47, she represented a new generation of leadership.
But it's important to remember that she also tried to become NATO's secretary general, and that didn't work out.
That's true, and some of the reasons why she wasn't chosen back then.
Like Germany's concerns about her potentially making things worse with Russia?
Right, those concerns are still relevant today, and her own words haven't exactly helped her either.
You mean when she said in GU that the EU's goal was Ukraine's victory?
Yeah, that statement caused some friction within the EU.
Why was that a problem?
Well, while many member states probably agree with her, it was a much stronger stance than the European Council's official position.
Which is more about supporting Ukraine as long as it takes and making sure that Russia doesn't win.
Right, it's a more nuanced approach.
So Kallas's statement was seen as too aggressive.
By some, yeah, especially in Berlin.
Because Chancellor Olaf Scholz is known for being more cautious.
Exactly. It shows you how delicate EU diplomacy can be.
Okay, then there's the whole issue of the frozen Russian assets.
Yes, that's a tricky one.
Kallas was really pushing for confiscating them, but that seems to have hit a wall.
It's definitely stalled.
What are the main roadblocks?
Well, the Baltic states are all for confiscating those assets.
Okay.
But the big Eurozone countries, they're not happy about it at all.
Really? Why is that?
For one thing, the European Council's legal service has warned about the legal risks.
Oh, I see.
And the European Central Bank is worried about investors getting spooked and pulling their money out.
Okay.
Plus, they're also considering using those assets as collateral for the loans that they've given to Kyiv.
Right, which are adding up.
Something like $50 billion so far.
Wow.
So with all that opposition, Kallas has put this on hold for now.
So what's the outlook for Kallas and her agenda? It seems like she's facing an uphill battle.
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
Things are changing all the time. Some people in Brussels are trying to take over some of her initiatives.
Oh, really?
Yeah, maybe they see this as an opportunity.
To step in?
Yeah, while others think she just needs more time to figure things out.
Because it's such a tough job.
Exactly. And her aid proposals will be discussed again by EU leaders soon.
Okay.
If Macron and Meloni decide to support bigger contributions, that could be a game changer.
Right? They're pretty influential.
Yeah, but most experts think it's going to be really hard to get a big increase in aid at this point.
Well, that's not very encouraging. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about this other big proposal that's been floating around, the idea of a European coalition of the willing to keep the peace in Ukraine once the fighting stops.
Yes, that's Sir Keir Starmer's idea.
So what's the basic idea behind this coalition?
Well, it's about thinking ahead, beyond the immediate conflict.
Okay.
and trying to create a system that will guarantee peace in Ukraine once the war is over.
So a European-led peacekeeping force?
Essentially, yeah, but there are some major obstacles in the way.
Like getting Russia to agree to it in the first place?
Well, yeah, that's a big one.
And there's not a lot of trust in Putin's intentions, is there?
No, not really.
His track record isn't exactly reassuring.
You know, all those times he's been accused of deception.
Right, like the assurances he gave before the special military operation even started.
So there's a lot of skepticism among Western leaders about whether he'd actually honor any peace agreement.
Right, they've been burned before.
And that lack of trust, it makes it really hard to make any progress diplomatically.
So the idea is to create a European security framework that doesn't rely on the U.S.
That's the goal. And they see Britain and France as the key players.
Taking the lead.
Yeah, ensuring Ukraine's safety and stability no matter what happens in Washington.
It's like they're trying to prepare for the worst-case scenario.
Exactly. And the recent pause in U.S. military aid to Ukraine,
Right.
it really highlighted how vulnerable they are if they rely too much on one external partner.
Because even a temporary pause can have a huge impact.
It can, and reportedly that pause might have even contributed to some of Russia's gains in the Kursk region.
Oh, wow.
It was a wake-up call for everyone.
Showing that they need to be more self-sufficient.
Right, and that a stronger independent European security commitment is essential.
But can Europe actually do it? I mean, can they deploy and maintain a large peacekeeping force in Ukraine without Russia's approval?
That's the million-dollar question.
Especially without U.S. intelligence and air support.
It's a logistical nightmare.
And a military one, too.
Imagine trying to deploy a huge peacekeeping force into a volatile situation where Russia might not cooperate.
Right.
It would be extremely difficult, and there are serious doubts about whether Europe could handle the intelligence gathering and air cover on their own.
Yeah, the condition of some European militaries is a concern.
Like the British Army, they don't have that many operational tanks.
Really?
So people are questioning whether a purely European peacekeeping operation could really work in such a high-risk environment.
That's a valid point. And it's not just the practicalities. It seems like there's some political opposition within Europe as well.
Oh, definitely.
Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has been pretty vocal about her doubts.
She basically called the idea risky, difficult, and ineffective.
Wow, so not exactly a ringing endorsement.
No, and when you have a major European leader like Meloni expressing that level of skepticism,
Right.
it shows you how divided opinions are.
And how hard it would be to actually get this coalition off the ground.
It faces an uphill battle for sure.
So if a large peacekeeping force is seen as too risky or impractical, what are the alternatives?
Well, one idea that's gaining traction is to just give Ukraine a lot more military aid.
Direct military support?
Yeah, basically arm them to the teeth so they can deter Russia themselves.
So it's more about empowering Ukraine to defend itself.
Exactly. And some argue that this would be more effective than relying on a potentially vulnerable international peacekeeping force.
That's an interesting argument. And where does Putin stand on all of this?
Well, he's made it very clear that he doesn't want any foreign military presence in Ukraine at all.
No surprises there.
He reportedly told Trump that he wants a complete ban on all foreign aid to Ukraine.
Including any kind of peacekeeping force.
Yeah, it's a non-starter for him.
So that pretty much rules out any international security presence that Russia sees as a threat.
Yeah, unless they change their stance, which seems unlikely.
And Macron has a different perspective on this whole deployment issue, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's saying that it should be up to Kyiv to decide.
Whether or not to allow Western troops on their soil.
Right, he's emphasizing Ukraine's sovereignty.
Which makes sense.
But the question is, even if Kyiv invites them in,
can they actually deploy without Russia's agreement?
it's highly unlikely.
Because Russia has made it very clear that they see any Western military presence near their border as a threat.
It's a red line for them.
And that was one of the main reasons they invaded in the first place.
Exactly. So even if Putin has a good relationship with a particular Western leader,
it won't change their overall strategic stance.
No, they're not going to compromise on this.
So we're back to square one, really.
It's a very complex situation.
So let's talk about these reports of the UK considering a more direct military role, specifically air patrols over Ukraine.
Okay.
This is part of Starmer's coalition of volunteers, right?
Yes, it's one of the ideas being floated.
And the idea is to have British fighter jets patrolling Ukrainian airspace.
Right, providing a layer of protection.
And it seems like this has gone beyond just talk.
Yeah, there have been some serious discussions at the military level
about how this would actually work.
They've been looking at the logistics of deploying Typhoons to provide air cover.
For any ground troops that might be part of the coalition.
Exactly, so they're really thinking this through.
But Macron seems to be pursuing a slightly different path.
Oh, you mean the UNLED mission?
Yes, he's suggesting that as an alternative to Starmer's plan
He thinks it would be more legitimate.
because it would have the backing of the UN.
Exactly. It would be a multilateral effort.
And we're also hearing that the UK Prime Minister might be willing to deploy ground troops, but only under very specific circumstances.
Yeah, the condition is that Trump has to broker a peace deal first.
So they're waiting to see what happens on the diplomatic front.
Yeah, it's all tied to that.
And the military is adamant that they won't deploy ground troops without air cover.
They've made that very clear.
Which makes sense. You don't want to send soldiers into a potentially hostile environment without protection.
Absolutely. And the most likely options for providing that air cover are either the British Typhoons
Right.
or the F-35 fighter jets.
Which are both capable of defending the airspace.
Yeah, they can conduct air patrols and engage enemy aircraft if necessary.
So it feels like the UK is really taking the lead on this.
They are, and I think it's partly because they're not sure what the U.S. is going to do in the long run.
Right, the uncertainty about future U.S. involvement is making them step up.
Exactly. They not make sure that Ukraine has support no matter what happens in Washington.
And it's not just about military deployments either.
No, Starmer's plan is much broader than that.
He's talking about land, sea, air, border security, and even reconstruction.
It's a whole-of-government approach.
A really comprehensive vision for Ukraine's future.
Yeah, he's trying to address all aspects of security and stability.
And his core belief is that any peace agreement without a strong enforcement mechanism is doomed to fail.
He's convinced of that.
Because he thinks Putin will just violate it.
Yeah, he sees it as inevitable based on Putin's past behavior.
So he thinks this coalition of volunteers is the only way to guarantee a lasting peace.
That's his argument.
But there are concerns about Europe's ability to actually carry out these air patrols.
Oh, yeah, especially compared to the U.S.
Their air power is just so much more advanced.
It is, and one area where Europe really lags behind is in airborne early warning systems.
Right? Those are crucial for managing the airspace and coordinating everything.
Exactly, and only the U.S. and France have those really sophisticated systems.
So that's a big gap that Europe would need to fill.
It would be a challenge for sure.
But there's a suggestion that the UK could take the lead on the air patrols.
With other countries supporting them or rotating in.
Right, sharing the burden.
Yeah, and a source from the Royal Air Force said that the British Army and RAF would probably be at the forefront of this effort.
So they'd be the first ones in.
The vanguard.
But even with all this talk, there haven't been any firm commitments yet.
No, not officially.
The Prime Minister's office says that no concrete promises have been made about providing air cover.
So it's still in the planning stages.
And the UK already has some commitments in the region as part of NATO.
Oh, right, the Typhoons in Poland.
Yeah, they're deploying 6 of them to Poland for NATO air patrols.
As part of their commitment to the alliance.
And they've said they could send more if needed.
So they're already contributing to regional security.
And all these military discussions are getting into the nitty-gritty details of how these air patrols would work.
Like which countries would provide what aircraft and where they would be based.
And how they would refuel and all the logistics.
All the practical stuff that needs to be figured out.
It's interesting that some military sources are describing this coalition of volunteers as more of a security force than a traditional peacekeeping force.
Yeah, there's a subtle difference there.
So what's the distinction?
Well, a traditional peacekeeping force is more about monitoring ceasefires and separating warring factions.
Right.
But this security force would be more proactive.
Okay.
Their main focus would be securing Ukrainian airspace and making sure that the Black Sea is safe for shipping.
So they would be more actively involved in protecting Ukraine.
Yes, and their priorities are very clear.
Secure the airspace and reopen the Black Sea.
Those are seen as the key steps to allow Ukraine to rebuild its economy and for people to return home.
Because right now it's too dangerous.
Exactly. And until those two things are achieved, it's going to be very difficult for Ukraine to recover.
But there are going to be huge challenges in integrating all these different countries' aircraft and personnel.
Oh, yeah. The Minister for the Armed Forces has talked about how complex it would be.
Because everyone has their own procedures and equipment.
It's not just a matter of everyone showing up with their planes and flying in formation.
Right. They have to make sure everything works together.
Exactly. And that includes things like refueling midair.
Which is incredibly complicated.
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot of coordination and precision.
And in a related development, Prince William recently visited Estonia.
Did he?
He met with Ukrainian refugees there, and he's also going to visit British troops stationed near the Russian border.
I see. So it's a show of support.
Yes, and a reminder that the UK is committed to the region.
These kinds of visits can have a big impact.
They do, and it's interesting to see how the public is reacting to all of this.
Have you seen much commentary?
Yeah, there's a lot of skepticism about these air patrol proposals.
What are people saying?
Well, they're worried about the cost and the risk of escalation.
Right. It's a big commitment.
And some people are also questioning whether it would actually be effective in achieving a lasting peace.
So there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety out there,
Definitely.
which is understandable given the stakes.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, it's clear that Europe is facing a really tough situation when it comes to Ukraine.
Yeah, it's a tangled web of internal divisions
External pressure from Russia.
and uncertainty about the future of U.S. policy
And our goal in this deep dive has been to present you with the facts.
as objectively as possible. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear, new episodes every day.